Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Scott.
I'm Shatay, and we're the Hazes.
Welcome to the Love Haze, where we believe that healing and wholeness are not just destinations.
That's right, we believe they're a journey. And here on the Love Haze, we talk about how to navigate through it.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to talk about generational blessings, y'all. These are those things that our ancestors gave us that keep us going and keep us fighting to be better, not just for us, but for those folks who will come after us as well. Welcome to our Black Love journey. Let's get right into it.
Let's go. So why are we talking about this? Where did this come from?
So I've just been thinking a lot around the language that we use. And I think there are so many of us, and I've been hearing so much around this idea of people wanting to be like a generational curse breaker.
Yeah.
And we want to be the people in our families to break generational curses. And I think that I'm starting to lean more into the fact that language is important.
Yeah.
And I read something recently on the internet that says something like, your ancestors gave you more than curses. Our ancestors gave us generational blessings,
Nice.
right? And we need to honor that. And I really want to, get to the meat of that and understand that, sometimes we get so focused on things being negative and trying to break old patterns of behavior that we really don't acknowledge that the things that our ancestors gave us that are positive.
Yeah.
And I just want to spend some time talking about that and how we deal with it, how we can change our mindsets and the language around the credit that we give our ancestors and the credit that we give ourselves for the gifts that they've given us.
All right, let's talk about it.
Let's do it. So tell me, what does generational cycles, what does that mean to you?
Thank you for saying it that way, because that, in terms of language, is what I would first call out. I don't like the language generational curse. And this is just my personal belief. I don't necessarily believe in curses. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in luck or anything like that. Now, I do believe in cycles. But the reason that I would not say it's a curse, this idea of a curse feels like someone else put it on you and they have the power to, only they have the power to remove it.
Right.
I absolutely don't believe in that.
I reject that.
I reject it. Now, cycles, and I think the root of it for me is like cycles of mindsets and cycles of circumstances that historically we see, especially in our culture and our families and in all of them. But when we think about generational cycles, it could be, I'm gonna just keep it 100 with y'all in terms of like, if you grew up in the church and then there are cycles of the women getting, having babies out of wedlock. That's a big one that we hear, often, or it could be cycles of some type of substance abuse from generation to generation. It could be cycles I've heard of like, dying early, like a young age. There are so many different things, but to your point, is usually in a negative connotation.
Right.
We don't ever really talk about the things that actually this other thing runs in the family. Generations of women in my family have all been dancers and performers. I think that's a beautiful blessing.
Absolutely.
Generations of folks who know how to cook well and love on their people well, and generations of, those are beautiful things that are definitely worth calling out, acknowledging, and affirming. But we do hear mostly about those negative cycles that have impacted us and keep us from moving forward. What are your thoughts on cycles?
So when I hear cycle, I just hear pattern.
Yeah.
And people go in cycles all the time. There are patterns of behavior that we repeat because we learned it that way. And I think that there are some, negative patterns of behavior that we all want to work on. I think that it is difficult sometimes for us to find our happiness and our joy because we focus so much on what it is that we have to work on to be better. And I think there's room to do work to deal with patterns, but there's also room to celebrate like the fact that we are still here, not just surviving, but that we are living life and living it abundantly.
Yeah.
That not only are we doing therapy and those types of things and dealing with some of the things that may have had negative impacts in our lives, but we're also celebrating our resilience and our strength and all of those things that I believe were passed down from our ancestors. The fight that we have.
Resilience, 1,000%.
Right. Absolutely.
1,000%.
The fight that we have to still be on the grind, to understand that, things will come against us, but they can't take us out.
Yeah.
Right. And we have to recognize those things as well and celebrate those things. And I just don't want to be a person who spends so much time doing the work to, get rid of some of these negative patterns that I don't celebrate the positive patterns.
Yeah, that's real. I like the idea of a pattern of behavior or pattern. Like I mentioned before, I definitely like the idea of it being like mindsets. Yeah. And a lot of times our environment, our circumstances from generation to generation shape your mindsets, right? What you've been exposed to, what you've seen. And to your earlier point in terms of people talking about the generational cycles or curses they're trying to break, I appreciate that, because what we are saying is that we are taking the power back from like life is not just happening to us. We're unlearning things. We are making better choices so that we can then change the lineage, for our descendants. And I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I would say we probably can't have in my opinion, it shouldn't be an either or conversation. It's not just blessings and it's not just cycles. You know what I mean? There's a whole, I think the totality of that impacts our lives in a certain way.
And I think a part of what I had to unpack in therapy, and what I'm still having to actively unpack, what it really comes down to is like how I talk to myself about myself. So going back to, the importance of how much language matters. If I believe that my lineage is somehow cursed, right, and that I am cursed, and it's something that I can't do anything about, I'm trying to break this curse, right? And it implies that there is some level of control that this thing has over my entire lineage that is just not true for me.
Yeah.
And I think that we just have to be careful how we talk to ourselves about ourselves, because it can feel like you're trapped in this thing that you cannot get out of. And I know that my ancestors have given me everything that I need in order to get out of negative patterns of behavior, but they've also given me, they've shed some light on some positive things that, I can use that, for this fight. So that, I can be a bridge builder for, those folks who are going to come after me.
Yeah, I think it's important also to call out something that came up on a recent episode when we were talking to Lola Troy from Heal Black Joy. I want to acknowledge that we can sit here and have this high-minded, sophisticated conversation about blessings and cycles, because we're not living with the same set of circumstances our ancestors had to live with. And just think about 1 and 2 generations ago of ancestors, right? I'm thinking about a grandparent or a great-grandparent, so that's like 3 generations ago. But the circumstances in our society are different in terms of how they had to live. My great-grandmother had to pay a poll tax to vote. You think about some of the blatant racism and discrimination. And so when I think of cycles that oftentimes we talk about, we want to break, where it could be alcoholism, drug abuse, or any of those things, a lot of those were direct outcomes of the circumstances of their life at the time, right? And so I don't want to sit here in our privilege of having a better life and be like, we're going to break these cycles, and I don't think this is what you're saying. I just want to say, for the sake of the conversation, we don't think we're better than our ancestors. We have a better situation and now can make different choices, Yeah.
And I think also that they had their fight and we have ours.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And acknowledging that I inherited their fight.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Some parts of it, yeah.
And that we have our fight of today that, it's not the same fight, but it's a continuation of, the lives that they wanted to see be better for us. I think that our lives are better because of the fight that they had, and the fight that they then instilled in us. but also is a part of our duty to understand that we have some fight because of them. If there are some things that I'm supposed to do in order to make it better for the next generation, then it is because of the fight that I got from my father and from my father's father, from my mother, from my mother's mother. The fight was a little bit different then, but there is still so much more fighting to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm even thinking in terms of like, and hopefully, when this episode is released, we'll have our new Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm saying her name right. Is it Jackson Brown or Brown Jackson?
I think it's Brown Jackson. Oh,
I know.
Y'all know who we're talking about,
right? But even watching, looking at her record and her being the most experienced nominee that has ever come up, and looking at the questioning that she had to endure, because they couldn't question her record, like attacking her on like her personal beliefs and that kind of stuff. It's a fight. I think that 1 to 2 to 3 generations ago, we would not. Our ancestors were fighting to have people be in the chair that she's sitting in, and then seeing her have to fight on that level to just defend her record of what she's done, over the course of her life as a judge. The fight is just different, but she has everything that she needs from her ancestors to be able to sit in that chair and fight that fight and defend her record and know that she's operated in the way, and she's still having to face like covert and overt racism. And it's just a different level of the fight. It's pretty overt. For us. It's overt. They think that they're being covert, but it's pretty overt for us. And so it's just a different level of the fight. So while I'm happy that she is there, and I know that she's going to be a Supreme Court justice, it just is infuriating that we're still having to fight this fight, but we're equipped for it. And it's just a different level of the fight. And there will be other things that we'll have to fight, and that our kids will have to be prepared for.
Yeah.
And I hope that they understand that, we use things like social media to call out, racism and put people on blast, and I'll add them on Twitter, and just say, you're a racist, and this is what it is. And I can't believe, and just call people out in that way and fight our fight in a different way. But we're still equipped for this work. And for the thousands of things that are going on, we have the ability to multitask in that way because of, what we received from our ancestors who were able to cope with so many things that were going on. We were dealing with civil rights and with, trying to get their children better education and, discrimination in their own workplaces and all those different things. And our fight is just, on a new level, in a better situation because of them, but still it is our fight to keep on fighting.
Yeah, I think that's a whole other conversation in terms of the systems of white supremacy, right? That, and how it looks for our ancestors versus how it looks for us. And yes, that threat of resilience and having to be better, being twice as good to get half of, like all of that is absolutely true. And part of our story in terms of cycles that we've had to endure and overcome and be equipped with, specifically in terms of the Black perspective in America. And I think white supremacy shows up in other places too. So I know it's not just an American struggle. And I also want to bring it back to just even on a familial level, and it can be hard to separate the two, but think about things like cycles of, what about cycles of infidelity or cycles of, babies outside the family, or cycles of those things that kind of hit closer to home that don't necessarily have to be directly tied to the fact that, we're in a struggle for equality on so many different levels. And I do want to take it back to the fact that you want to talk more about blessings and not the cycles. But before we do, you mentioned a little bit in terms of self-talk earlier, how has like this idea of cycles shown up in your life or your family's life. And it doesn't have to be negative cycles. Like, you could talk about positive cycles too, but how's that showing up for you?
I think a portion of it is like what I was talking about earlier, like the way that I recognize that I talk to myself about myself. I think that is some of the negative cycles that I've tried to break have been around that, and some of the things that I got from my dad, just about how his language, and he was always just very hard. I think that was a part of how he learned to show up in the world, to show up and be on the defensive a lot, and he brought that along with him. And I think that, some of that he medicated with alcoholism because he didn't know a better way to cope. And I think that what I've learned to pull from that is the fight to show up in the world a different way, a better way, and to try not to use things to medicate. But I still, got my ability to show up, from my dad. I just want to show up in a better way. And I appreciate him fighting until the end, and being steadfast and sometimes very rigid in what he believed. But it also taught me that, I can have my belief systems and not be immovable, but be locked into what it is that I believe and be willing to fight for it. And so that to me is a generational blessing that is of my lineage. Because his brother was that way. My Uncle Maurel that I admire so much. My Aunt Della was that way. All of his brothers and sisters are folks who believe what they believe. And essentially you can go to hell, if you want to fight them on what it is that they believe. And I am my father's child. And you will frequently tell me that I have my W on my chest for Warren.
Regularly.
Because I can be stubborn, and I can be locked into what I believe, and I can fight somebody for my damn family. And so we have to pull the best parts of our people out of that. And I think what I want to focus in on is the fact that there are the best parts of them that they imparted to us.
Absolutely.
There are some things that we don't want of that. And I think that some of their coping skills were limited. And going back to the idea that we speak from a place of privilege, I would probably be medicating in some of the same ways that my dad did had I not had access to therapy like he did it. So I pull the best parts of my dad out, and I also take my black ass to therapy to, help me hone in on what that should look like. So the best parts of him are definitely in me. And that fight and that rigidness and that hold that I have to family and how important it is. What do you think it is for you?
Couple things. Cycles, I'm actually thinking through in terms of things that I'm actively trying to release are, I think a little bit, if I'm being honest, I've seen, I don't know how far back this goes, but I've seen in certain parts of the family this kind of, I don't know if meekness is the right word, but like shrinking back. It's fear. It's at the end of the day, it's fear. Fear has shown up in terms of fear of really revealing yourself, which is interesting to say coming from a family of performers, right? Like you can be out there and perform, but you're not really revealing like the innermost parts of you. But there's been a fear, I think, of like actually being seen in some very vulnerable way that I literally have been working against, especially in the past couple of years. And that's really uncomfortable to be vulnerable in more spaces than just family and close friends. That's really uncomfortable. But I think the root of it is just fear. And so I've basically tried to break cycles of operating out of fear. One thing though that I want to call out for sure in terms of something that's been a blessing is that I come from, on both sides of my family, a long lineage of people of faith that I hands down am just grateful for. from just not my mom's side, who's an elder in the church, and I know my grandmother was a woman of faith. Talking about my dad, who was a pastor, and my grandmother, and my grandmother's father, who was a pastor. Just surrounded by and just growing up in church. And I really want to be clear, like, while there's is very much seeped in a Christian faith, I have, and my choices are more universal spiritual truths with a Christian foundation, but still just that being able to walk by faith, prayer, affirming yourself, like just that belief in something bigger, higher power than yourself, I think is important and carries you through really, really, at least it's carrying me through really tough seasons in my life.
I think what I'm holding on to the most from what you just said is just, the idea that even when you think about a Christian foundation, I think the things that our parents and their parents and those folks before it was laying the foundation for who we are.
Yeah.
Right. And then we're responsible to keep building. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it can be the firm foundation. And there is something that we're supposed to do in the building to release the things that don't work, and have not worked for our lineage, and to build up and add some more to that. So having this idea that we can have our Christianity and lean more into relationship and life application, which is how we've chosen to live, and has, I believe, helped us live a greater and more fulfilling life that is based on relationship rather than just on strict religion.
Yeah.
But it's grounded in like our spiritual beliefs, how we were raised, all of those things, and we release the things that are unhealthy for us. Same thing with my mom and her family having to, cling on to this idea of how important family is, how important it is to be there for family, but also having now that as my foundation, and also releasing those things that are unhealthy, right? Releasing those things that allow folks sometimes to count on you too much, and having to leave some of those things behind, and allowing family members to lean more into the idea that they can do it, and encouraging them along those lines. So yes, I am here for you always, but also I believe in you, and I believe that you can do this. And if you fall, I'm going to be here for you, but I'm not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Right. So foundational, yes, I got you no matter what, but I am going to let you go out and try on your own. So I believe in all of those things, and that, we need those foundations, the blessings of those foundations. And, even with your mom having family prayer ongoing every other Thursday, it keeps us grounded together as family. She prays for y'all's immediate family, your extended family, for my family, for anybody that's tied to us. And she's going to do that. And it keeps us grounded to the ideas of family, Christian faith, all of those things. But we also take those things and we build more with them. And I believe that that's our duty, and we recognize those blessings of the foundation, and we move forward with adding on to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what's the haze, I guess, of all of this idea of cycles? It could be the haze of cycles and breaking them, or the haze of even just being able to call out the positive patterns that were left for us.
I think it's layered. So the haze for me is continuously trying to find out ways to be better, right? And hold to my foundation, to honor the good things about where I came from, and not just be constantly in a fix mode, trying to fix those bad things. And sometimes also the way that I see some of the negative cycles show up when I'm, not feeling my best. Some of that stuff has been in me for so long, it'll show up, and having the appropriate tools to use to cope in the right way when those things show up. And that can be a little bit of a haze. And being able to just call it out for what it is
that's
and
what I was
say that it is not real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not who I am. I'm better than those things that I have been taught that don't serve me well.
Yeah, I would even take it a step further. It's like, in order to call it out, you've got to be able to see it for what it is. Yeah. So I think a haze could be to be able to remove yourself from the situation enough, remove yourself from how much love you have for your people, to look at like, okay, this is what I've seen. And by taught, we've learned a lot by just modeling. Like, this is how my people operated. This is how they acted. So now this is just how I act. Mm-hmm. So like, I think a haze could be just stepping back enough to be like, okay, this is how everybody operates. Is this how I want to operate too? And if not, why not? And if not, what do I want to do instead? Yeah. So it's like stepping back, calling it out, and then being able to make the choice, make a different choice when it's not comfortable to do that, right? And I think another part of the haze could be when we've decided to change ourselves and then we're still around family who is not going to change, like that way of living still works for them. That can also be a haze, because then it's all of a sudden you're othered, and all of a sudden it could be, and this doesn't always happen, but it does happen, especially with our people. Oh, you think you're better than us, or you know, like, so that's a lot to deal with, because those are your people who are supposed to be with you, for you, no matter what.
Yeah. I think my determination has been, and I thank you for a lot of this, when some of those patterns show up in my family and I start to question myself about if I'm being too rigid, one of the things that you always made me think about was like, is this fruitful? Right? Is this pattern of behavior, or, you know, the way that you are dealing with this situation, is it yielding any fruit? And I think just from a ground level at baseline, I don't want to do things that are not fruitful. And you helped me realize that and helped me hold on to some of those ideas that I'm not going to fall out with my family when we, you know, kind of get to those intersections. But I'm not going to do things that are not fruitful either. So there is a balance. The haze is like, how much do I allow my folk to be my folk and just love on them where they are? And then how much of it has to be that I want to show them that things can be different, and I want this to be fruitful. And so that's even showing up now in like communication styles and folks not saying the thing, and to keep on like, you know, reaching the same, like we bumping heads because of lack of communication sometimes. But I want to show them like, okay, stop calling me about this thing that you haven't said to the other person. Say the thing to the other person and see if it yields any fruit.
First of all, wow, I didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that about the fruitful thing. And that point, that's what they've always seen and done, right? And so in order for them to break that cycle, it's going to take them stepping back and being like, oh, why don't I say something to that other person? Why is it that I just decide to call you and vent instead of just being real with the person instead? So it goes back to what we've seen in our households. Like, how was conflict handled in the household? If our household was like, don't nobody say anything, we brush it under the rug and then act like everything is fine, guess what? As adults, that's what's going to happen. Or if it's like everybody blow up and fight and don't talk for some time, and then come back and start talking again, that's how we're going to be as adults. And we have to be able to choose, like, is this how I want to operate? What's actually a healthy way to resolve this conflict? How can I say what's on my mind and not sever the relationship in the process? And that is, all of that is a haze. All of it is. I think, though, to your point, the blessing in all of it, especially when it comes to family and generational cycles and patterns in that regard, is that for so many of us, family has been like the founding, grounding. Like, our families want to be connected. We want to be with each other. We want to be around, even if it is whatever version of dysfunctional. We still want to be with each other. And I will say that in of itself is also a privilege, because there are some people that either don't have enough family members alive, or you know, that they know of to count on one hand, or if they do know them, is just so much toxicity that they just, for their own sanity, aren't even connected with them. So, you know, the things that we deal with in community with our family, at least we still have that. And I just want to say that there are some people that, you know, just don't even have that part of it.
And they don't. And I think what I'm finding my way through is to try to take a strengths-based approach. Because even when my family has communication issues, is a lot of times around like the not talking about what it is that I'm trying to do. Like there's a family member who is, you know, doing the thing that they do that they're good at, and just not telling the other folk what the plan is. Right. And so when I don't tell you what the plan is, I want to be able to like call out what your strength was in what you decided to do. Like, I appreciate you taking on this thing, right, that I didn't have time or the space or the energy to do. But just tell me about the plan so I can not only celebrate you, but I can also not step on your toes because I'm included in the conversation, you know, and that goes a long way. Just, you know, having and it's, I think that when communication doesn't happen a lot of times, when we don't see our people, see them for their strength and tell them what their strength is, a lot of times they feel attacked. And so we just have to call out the thing and say that it is a strength. And I believe that we have generational blessings in both of our families that people just don't understand and don't talk about.
Like what?
I think the way that folks show up in the world, the way that they operate, the way that they have a sense of like, for my little sister right now in this moment, she is living with my mom, taking care of her, making sure she gets, you know, a lot of the things that she needs. But I think when we don't have conversation, we don't know everything that she's doing there at the house.
She's doing a lot for her.
And, you know, she could have moved out a long time ago. But from people who, you know, are outside that situation, you know, like, oh, you know, she ain't doing nothing, you know, but you don't know it. But here I am in my comfortable home in Atlanta, Georgia, knowing that my mother's taken care of because my little sister and my older sister are there to kind of tag team with making sure that she gets to her appointments and getting everything that she needs. But I don't hear those things. And so I don't know what's going on. And so then I have the story that I'm telling myself. Right. And I need to know that both of those sisters who are my sisters are doing the strong things and taking care of their mother and just not talking about it. They're not celebrating themselves for it, but they are doing that work, you know? And sometimes my anger with them is because, well, they ain't told me nothing.
He got FOMO, y'all. So if you're hearing this, you need to include Scotty in the conversation.
But not even that. The onus is on me too to understand that those are my people. They are doing the best that they can, but also they are using their strengths and their resources to make sure that at a foundational level that our family is taken care of, right? And they're not going to make any negative choices and do anything that is on the opposite side of that, you know, in whatever way they choose to do it. And that is a blessing to their family because they're their children and they see how important that is, and they will, you know, model that positive behavior. They have to be able to zoom out sometimes, not always able to do it before I call one of my sisters and cuss them out.
No, it's not you calling them to cuss them out. It's them calling you, and then the cuss out just ensues. And they don't even know it, y'all. They don't even know.
Oh, they know. Cuss them out to their face. Let me talk to my therapist about it.
They don't know what's coming. That's what I mean. Like calling them, be like, "What's good?" He's like, "You know what?" And another thing. Anyway.
But you know, we can just be better. You know, we have to be, and we have to recognize that we're passing on good stuff. You know, we come from good seed. We are good soil. We are all of those things. So we are going to be good.
Yeah. In terms of navigating the haze, I guess the one thing that's coming to mind for me in this moment is, we say this often, at the end of the day, regardless of whether we agree with someone's behavior or not, at the end of the day, I firmly believe that everybody is just doing the best that they can with who they are at that moment, with what they know at that moment. There are moments where we do know better and still choose not to do better. That can also be true at the same time. But in terms of how our ancestors may have coped with life, the not so healthy patterns of behavior that they employed, at the end of the day, I think they just did the best that they could. Mm-hmm. And so now we're in a position to say, to your earlier point, take the meat and toss the bone with some of that and just make better choices. Mm-hmm. So in navigating that, I would just maybe say that's the thing to remember. Everybody was just doing the best that they could. If what we learned or experienced growing up just doesn't work for who we are, mm-hmm. or the adults that we want to be, just take the steps to change it. Have grace for yourself as you're mm-hmm. trying to change it, and just continue to choose what you want over and over and over. The lives that we're actively living right now, every single one of us, are a culmination of choices that we've made, mm-hmm. right, up until this point. Yeah. And so now if you've looked at your life and said, I don't like this life, I don't like how I am in it, I don't like what I see, I don't like what I experience, I don't like who's in it with me, then that means you've got to take the step mm-hmm. to make new choices repeatedly over and over and over until you look up one day and say, okay, this is actually what I want. And I think mm-hmm. that's the feedback loop that we have to constantly be in, is like, what am I feeling? Is this how I want to be feeling? Is this right for me? And then you make a different choice, right? So in terms of navigating, I think that's a one way to approach it. What are your thoughts?
Mine are, and I like when I get a chance to grab a hold of something that you already said, but and I'm not picking apart what you said, but one of the things that you said was that they were doing the best that they could with the information that they had, right? So along those lines, I want to, in your words, I want to call out that them doing the best that they could with the information that they had was good enough. That it led to us being able to sit here mm-hmm. right now. And the fact that we're able to sit here right now and make choices for better, that means that the best that they were doing at that time was good enough to set us up for this platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so that within itself is a generational blessing, because I understand that I may not see the harvest of all the seeds that I'm planting. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just planting seeds for just me. Yeah. Right. I'm planting so that my son and daughter and their children will be able to see that harvest. Mm-hmm. And I know that even if it didn't go exactly according to plan, because of some of the choices that they made or whatever, it was still good. It was still a blessing. It still resulted in blessing, because here we are, right? Folks who are choosing to love, not only each other, but on our family members who don't always get it right. We are choosing to see the good in them, even, when we don't always agree.
And sometimes we're the ones that don't get it right.
Right. Yeah. And choosing to be receivers of grace and purveyors of grace mm-hmm. because of some seeds that were planted by our ancestors. Yeah. Whether we took that information and decided to model, or we chose to allow it to model in reverse, to say, I never want to do that. Yeah. Whatever it was, our folk were in the game, right? They were out there living this thing, making errors and correcting, doing the best that they could. But also it was good because it resulted in this, and us being able to look at that behavior and say, wasn't the best decision, so I want to do something different for the people who will come after me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's how I choose to navigate it, because I still know that at baseline they were good. Yeah. And the decisions that they made were good, and it resulted in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have any, biggest lessons that you've learned? It feels like what we just mentioned in terms mm-hmm. of navigation mm-hmm. is the lesson of, at least that I've learned with cycles. It's just about choice, awareness and choice. Do you have anything else to offer in terms of the biggest lesson you learned there?
Other than it's important to do the thing. Mm-hmm. Because your people don't learn nothing from you by you being too scared to do the thing. Every mistake and misstep and success and failure that I have learned from my ancestors is because they were doing the thing. They were living.
In whatever way that was for
right,
them.
In whatever way it was for them, mm-hmm. whether they got it right or got it wrong, they wasn't sitting on the bench waiting on things to happen. If for those who were, we understand that we want to be in the game. We want to be doing the thing and living our lives to the best of our ability, and they set the foundation for that. So no matter what, I want to be doing the thing. Whether I get it right or get it wrong, I want it to be because I was in the game.
I was here, as Beyonce said. I was here. Speaking of music.
Ain't nobody spoke of music but you.
Well, I just want to say that this whole time, listen, the ancestors dropped lyrics into my spirit. Do I not have a lyric for like every situation?
Everything, Lord.
Anyway, a lyric or a movie line.
I think our ancestors get on my nerves a little bit too.
That wasn't the only song that dropped in my spirit. I have another one that I will share, but I want to ask you first, what is your music for this moment?
It is your favorite artist in the world, Beyonce.
She's one of my favorites. Let's also give Maze featuring Frankie Beverly. They do, because I love them. My whole court. Okay.
So Black Parade is my music for the moment. Because our ancestors been out here doing the thing. They gave us blessings, and we need to put those things on parade. And we are walking success stories because of them. They were successful because we are products of them. They planted good seed and good soil. And they nourished us, and we are the harvest of the things that they planted. Yeah. And we should put that shit on parade.
Yeah. On my throne sitting high.
Right.
Come on, follow my
They know they see it.
Black Parade.
Come on, Supreme Court Justice. You know you see it.
Hey, I will also add, when you were talking earlier, what dropped in my spirit was way up. I feel blessed. So we're gonna have to add Big Sean blessings on blessings on blessings to this conversation. We're gonna add it to the playlist. Yeah. So make sure y'all follow our playlist on Spotify. It's the Love Haze
Music for the Moment playlist.
All of the songs that we've said felt like all the conversations we've had. This is now our 31st conversation.
Come on, 31.
So yeah, we getting good and grown out here. But this has been a really lovely conversation as always.
Oh, it was lovely.
And like we always say, life, it's going to present you with a haze, shawty. Life will present you with a haze, but we all have everything we need within us to navigate through it.
And you're not alone.
Nope.
So join us next time. And like always, we'll continue to navigate it together.
That's right.
We appreciate y'all. See you next time.
Bye.
Peace.